BBC Flight 781 was a British Overseas Airways Corporation passenger flight from Singapore to London. On January 10, 1954, a de Havilland COMET passenger jet operating the flight suffered an explosive decompression at altitude and crashed, killing all 35 people on board. The aircraft, registered G-ALYP, had taken off shortly before from Ciampino Airport in Rome, en route to Heathrow Airport in London, on the final leg of its flight from Singapore. After it exploded, the debris from the explosion fell into the sea near the island of Elba, off the Italian coast. G-ALYP was the third COMET built. Its loss marked the second in a series of 3 fatal accidents involving the COMET in less than 12 months, all caused by structural failures. History. In its issue dated January 11, 1954, the New York Times published a report stating that a British COMET jet airliner had plunged into the sea near the western coast of Italy, specifically between the islands of Elba and Monte Cristo. As per the report, it was strongly suspected that the tragic incident had claimed the lives of 35 people. Extensive recovery operations were carried out overnight. Yet despite thorough searches in the frigid waters, prospects of finding any survivors were bleak down. The task of finding out what had happened to Flight 781 was difficult at first, because the accident had occurred over water. In 1954, there were no cockpit voice recorders or flight data recorder to assist crash investigators, and there existed no established protocol for aircraft accident investigation at the time. An extensive search for the aircraft was organized, which included the Royal Navy ships, as well as the Maltese civilian salvage vessel Sea Salver. The search effort involved the pioneering use of underwater TV cameras, developed by a team at the UK Admiralty Research Laboratory, to help to locate and salvage the wreckage in deep water. Witnesses to the crash were a group of Italian fishermen who rushed to the scene to recover the bodies and to search for possible survivors, of whom there were none. The aircraft wreckage was eventually found on the seafloor. It was subsequently raised and transported to the Royal Aircraft Establishment for investigation. To find more evidence concerning the cause of the crash, the bodies were brought to the coroner for post-mortem. During the examination, pathologist Antonio Fornari found broken and damaged limbs, which had apparently occurred after death. He also discovered in most of the victims a distinct pattern of injuries, consisting of fractured skulls and ruptured and otherwise damaged lungs, which he identified as the actual cause of death. Fornari was confused by the pattern of injuries because he could find no evidence of an explosion. The ruptured lungs were a sure indicator that the air cabin had depressurized, because the sudden decrease in pressure would have caused the lungs to expand until they ruptured. To support this theory, and also to confirm the cause of the skull fractures, the crash was simulated at the RAE in Farnborough by reproducing the conditions of the actual plane prior to the crash. To make this possible, a model fuselage was constructed that was similar to that of the COMET. Dummies were seated within the fuselage to replicate the possible movements of the passengers during the crash. In order to simulate the crash, the investigators deliberately ruptured the model fuselage by increasing the air pressure inside until it exploded. The movement of the dummies within the air cabin revealed the cause of the skull fractures. At the moment that the fuselage exploded, they were thrown out of their seats and slammed headfirst into the ceiling. Upon examination of the aircraft wreckage by the RAE, it became evident that the aircraft had broken up in mid-air, and there was initially some speculation that the aircraft might have been brought down by a bomb. Suspicion then shifted to the possibility of an engine turbine explosion, and modifications were instigated in other COMETs, where the turbine ring was encased with armor plate to contain a possible disintegration of the turbine disc. The possibility of failure of the pressure cabin was also considered, but this theory was discounted because the COMET's cabin had been designed to a considerably higher strength than was considered necessary at the time. In the meantime, all COMETs were to be grounded until the turbine modifications had been carried out. The New York Times reported on January 12 that Boac had temporarily withdrawn all of their de Havilland COMET jet airliners from service as a result of the crash, and that the two French airlines that used the COMET, the Air France and Union Aero Maritime de Transports, had also suspended their COMET services. Boac had confirmed that their COMET routes would be flown with alternative aircraft to minimize the disruption to the service schedule. The airline emphasized that the planes had not been officially grounded by the British government, but that the action was being taken as a measure of prudence to enable a minute and unhurried technical examination of every aircraft in the COMET fleet to be carried out at maintenance headquarters at London Airport. While the official investigation efforts began, Boac were determined to return their COMETs to passenger service as soon as possible, and succeeded in doing so on March 23rd, just 10 weeks after the crash. Boac's chairman commented on television, "We obviously wouldn't be flying the COMET with passengers if we weren't satisfied conditions were suitable." However, a second Boac de Havilland COMET, registered G-ALYP, was lost on April 8, 1954. A flight, operating as South African Airways, departed from Rome bound for Egypt with 14 passengers and 7 crew on board. 33 minutes into the flight, the pilot reported on course flying at 10,000 meters. Then all contact was lost. Initial examination and reconstruction of the wreckage of G-ALYP revealed several signs of in-flight breakup. With most of the wreckage recovered, investigators found that fractures started in the roof of the cabin. A window then smashed into the elevators. The rear fuselage then tore away. The outer wing structure fell. Then the outer wing tips, and finally the cockpit broke away, and fuel from the wings set the debris on fire. The airframe was put in a large water tank. The tank was filled, and water was pumped into the plane to simulate flight conditions. The experiment was run 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. It could possibly have taken as long as 5 months. Official findings concerning Boac Flight 781 and South African Airways Flight 201 were released jointly on February 1, 1955, in Civil Aircraft Accident. Report of the Court of Inquiry into the accidents to COMET G-ALYP on January 10, 1954, and COMET G-ALYY on April 8, 1954. After the equivalent of 3,000 flights simulated with GLYU, investigators at the RAE were able to conclude that the crash of G-ALYP had been due to failure of the pressure cabin at the forward window in the roof. This window was one of 2 apertures for the aerials of an electronic navigation system in which opaque fiberglass panels took the place of the window glass. The failure was a result of metal fatigue caused by the repeated pressurization and depressurization of the aircraft cabin. Another fact was that the supports around the windows were riveted, not glued, as the original specifications for the aircraft had called for. The problem was exacerbated by the punch rivet construction technique employed. Unlike drill riveting, the imperfect nature of the hole created by punch riveting caused manufacturing defect cracks, which may have caused fatigue cracks to start around the rivet. The investigators examined the final piece of wreckage with a microscope. Metal fatigue is the initiation and propagation of cracks in a material due to cyclic loading. Once a fatigue crack has initiated, it grows a small amount with each loading cycle, typically producing striations on some parts of the fracture surface. The crack will continue to grow until it reaches a critical size, which occurs when the stress intensity factor of the crack exceeds the fracture toughness of the material, producing rapid propagation and typically complete fracture of the structure. Fatigue has traditionally been associated with the failure of metal components, which led to the term metal fatigue. In the 19th century, the sudden failing of metal railway axles was thought to be caused by the metal crystallizing because of the brittle appearance of the fracture surface, but this has since been disproved. Most materials, such as composites, plastics, and ceramics, seemed to experience some sort of fatigue-related failure.